So in this segment, we're going to be talking about the government finally doing something to deal with the backlog in the courts. And I'm not sure if this is enough. I don't have a background in law, but given how bad the backlog is, and the fact that I don't think there are enough judges or enough courts, especially due to COVID. The government let the problem get so bad that once COVID hit, like I've made a point, this is a point I've made before, that COVID has exacerbated a lot of the problems we already had within the country. We already had a giant backlog when it came to court cases before the pandemic. It's just made it worse, and it's kind of opened up how bad it is. But it was always pretty bad. A decade of cuts. It says here, a deal has been struck over emergency funding to combat the unprecedented backlog in criminal trials. The Lord Chief Justice will be able to ask the government for unlimited funding to open up more courtrooms in England and Wales whenever judges are available. The issue is social distancing. The issue is social distancing because you can have as many judges as you want, but if there's not enough space in the actual courtroom, like physical space in the courtroom, then you're not going to be able to do certain cases. It mentioned in this article that they had to knock down sort of one of the courtrooms into a bigger courtroom in order to deal with a gang trial because of social distancing. So currently, there's a record backlog of 58,000 Crown Court cases. This was caused by funding-related delays, which were then exacerbated by the pandemic. And it's important for people to remember that, yes, the pandemic has made it worse, but this situation was already bad. That's the point. Ministry of Justice spokesperson said, there will be no limit on the number of court days Crown Courts can sit for the next financial year. We know that before the government reduced sitting days for judges in order to cut costs, and what that meant is there were less judges available to hear cases, and therefore massive delays for people. So if you were a victim of a crime, it will take you a long time to get justice, which causes more problems, as the article points out. As we continue to boost recovery in the courts following the pandemic, this will help maximise capacity across the justice system and safely hold as many hearings as possible over the coming year, but you should never have let it get so bad in the first place. The backlog has been growing by about 1,000 cases per month, meaning some suspects and victims are waiting until 2023 for prosecutions to be heard. So could you imagine waiting 3 or 4 years to have a resolution to a crime you were a victim of? Nah. I couldn't. Barristers are now predicting some of these trials may not take place until 2024. That's ridiculous. Unless there is a massive increase in court availability. This is crazy. Senior judges fear fewer cases will reach a conclusion with either a conviction or an acquittal, as evidence is compromised by the passage of time and the loss of confidence from victims and witnesses, because the longer it takes, sometimes victims would just want the case to go away. They might not press charges, or they might stop pressing charges or whatever because it's just taking too long. Could you imagine if you were a witness or a victim of a crime and it's taken you 4 years to get justice? That's hanging over your head. It's ridiculous. And this is a story we've covered before about this person who, this isn't her real name, this person called Jenny. For legal reasons, the BBC is not revealing details of the case, but put briefly, she quietly and secretly coped for years, having been the victim of a serious sexual violence. When the Me Too movement took hold, she decided that she too had to speak out. In 2018, detectives video recorded Jenny's allegations. So 2018, this happened. That was about 3 years ago. After a long and complex investigation, the Crown prosecution concluded last summer that her abuser should be charged with serious offences. So it took a long time to investigate, and that last year, so during 2020, they were told that charges can be pressed and this person can go to court. Jenny agreed not to begin deep trauma therapy because it may affect her evidence in court. So she's still dealing with this. Last autumn, she learned that her abuser would face trial. She was told that she needs to. When is she going to be free within the next 9 months or whatever? The first and second court hearing were really close to each other, which gave her hope. And she was asked to provide availability for court for the next 9 months. So she thought it was going to be close. But then she got the call and they gave her the date 2022. So she has to wait 2 years, around about 2 years to go to court. It's already taken 4 years, about three years for the investigation to take place and have all of that come through. Partly probably down to police cuts as well. And now it's going to take it took her about 2 years just for this thing to fully go to court, after the first and second hearings. This is ridiculous. This is absolutely ridiculous that this is happening in this country. So this is about the funding deal increases the number of sitting days that will be funded for the next year's financial year in England and Wales. Sitting days are the number of occasions that specific courtroom is open and fully managed by staff and a judge so it can hear a case. And we know that the government reduced sitting days in order to cut costs, which was a dumb thing to do. But then again, this government is not full of intelligent people. None of these Conservative governments have been. In 2010, there were around 110,000 Crown Court sitting days. The court budget was then cut following decisions by then coalition government. On the eve of the pandemic, sitting days were at a low of 86,000, meaning that only 45% of available spaces, about 200 courtrooms, were being used. That's throughout England and Wales. Only 200 courtrooms were being used. Like, this is that's insane. That's insane. They cut it looks like the amount of sitting days by around about 20,000, by over 20,000, and the Conservative government prides itself apparently on being the party of law and order. You're the biggest bunch of frauds I've ever seen in my life. COVID challenges. So it talks here about the COVID challenges, saying that it's not clear in practice how many extra court sitting days will be achievable because of the challenges of social distancing, meaning the plan may initially struggle. There are now 300 COVID-safe courtrooms open for jury trials, which isn't a lot considering it's for England and Wales, plus 120 spaces for hearings, an additional 60 Nightingale courts to further ease the pressure, which still is not a lot. 30 of those 90 Nightingale courts can hold a jury trial. So, again, not a lot of spaces for these to deal with these cases. Tens of courtrooms. That's a weird way to put it. Tens of courtrooms across England and Wales remain locked and completely unusable because they are too small to accommodate all the people required for a prosecution to progress. Because you do need quite a few people for a court case. Secondly, social distancing. That problem has become so acute that 2 separate courtrooms in Manchester are being knocked into one to allow a major gang trial to progress. The plan is also dependent on the availability of part-time judges. These are experienced criminal barristers who take time out of their work for prosecuting or defending to sit as a judge instead. So things have gotten so bad that we're asking barristers to really play a large part in this and to temporarily leave their role as barristers to be judges. I do wonder how much that was the norm before 2010. These fee-paid judges are a critical part of the criminal justice system. Funding to pay for their work was halved in the 2 years to the eve of the pandemic. So whilst that the pandemic was last year, so in 2018, that funding for part-time judges that were criminal barristers was cut. Why? That's Theresa May who cut that. Why? And with the backlogs now so high, it's unclear how many eligible barristers will be able to find the time to pick up the work, considering that these people would be needed for court cases anyways. So how many of them can afford to drop the massive backlog of cases in order to deal with the massive amount of court cases, the backlog, essentially, if you see what I'm saying? Like, you're asking criminal barristers who may be needed to deal with cases as, the defence or prosecution to then give up that role in order to be judges because there aren't enough judges in the first place. And I do wonder if the secret barrister is eligible to be a part-time judge. I do wonder about that person. Anyways, this is from Labour, so they talk about the decade of cuts. Labour called for a guaranteed 120,000 sitting days, a third higher than at present, and I think that is higher than that was under New Labour. I think that was 110,000 under New Labour, so that's quite interesting. David Lammy, who is the Shadow Justice Secretary, said the government turned its back on victims of crime by allowing the Crown Court backlog to reach more than 57,000 cases for the first time. A decade of Conservative cuts to courts, sitting days, and the whole justice system allowed the backlog to grow a staggering 39,000 cases even before the pandemic began. So you can see that the pandemic has massively jolted the amount of cases that, if David Lammy, if this is the number, 39,000 pre-pandemic, that's about, what's that, trebled? It's gone up by a lot, about, I think, 3 times. Yeah, about 3 times the number. So what more is there to say apart from anyone who believes the Conservative Party, the party of law and order, are absolute idiots? Because when you think about it, right, the Conservative Party have cut police funding. They've cut funding to courts, which means that it's harder to actually catch criminals, and now it's harder to prosecute them. So which part of that falls into law and order? These people are waiting years. Some of these people, victims of serious crimes here, have been waiting years to get their day in court. And, the longer it goes, the less reliable witnesses are, the more that, memories change. Some of these people haven't been able to get the therapy they need in order to deal with the crimes that they were a victim of. And, this government don't care about victims. Anyone who believes this, the Conservative Party are the party of law and order, you join the Conservative Party in being the biggest frauds on the planet.